Everybody wants a big and consistent low end in their mixes. And what they usually do to try to achieve that is by grabbing an EQ or a compressor or something like that. But they're usually skipping this really fundamental thing that they should be looking at first. Let me show you what I'm talking about. So I'm working on this mix for a new client, and he's got a bass part in the song that's comprised of 3 tracks. He's got like a sub bass, an 808 type sound, and a key bass. And as I'm working on it, I'm noticing that every once in a while, the low end just kind of randomly kind of goes away. Like the sub, everything in the super low end just kind of disappears. Let me show you right here. Oh, and I should mention that the artist's name is Big Banks, and the name of the song is Birthday Mood. You should check him out. So here's the bass part, and I should clarify that everything I'm talking about here today is super low frequencies. You're not going to actually hear what I'm doing here unless you've got a good subwoofer or a nice big system. And this is for like things specifically for listening in the club, big PA, car stereo. However, if you're watching this video, even if you aren't listening with a sub right now, keep watching because you'll actually be able to visually see what I'm talking about here. Some of this can be demonstrated that way. All right, so here's the bass part. There's a section where it loses a little bit. Here's another one. There. There. There's another one. It seems like it's always that first low note when he comes back around from the high notes, that first low note for the most part is where the low end goes away. It's actually kind of inconsistent where it happens in the song, but that's where it's happening mostly. I'm going to loop a little section here so that you can see exactly what I'm talking about. Check it out. There, there, there. You see? There, there. It's a subtle thing, but when you're really blasting this on a big system, it's huge. It's just... losing that low end just loses a lot of energy. So let me show you what I got to do. Well, let me show you what's going on. You can see the waveform here. You see how it's out of phase. The 808 is out of phase with the key bass. This one's in phase. Here's another one, a section where it's a little out. Not as out as the other one, but just enough out to lose some low end. This one here is really out. You see how they're just opposite. And actually, let me just stop right here and explain phase a little bit more for some of the people who may not totally understand what I'm talking about. Phase has a lot to do with, you know, if you're in your DAW and you look at the waveform in your editor window, is where the waveform's going up and down like this, right? So how the waveforms between different sounds interact is what phase is all about, whether they're offset a little bit, or whether, you know, when one sound's waveform is going into the positive side and the other one's going into the negative side, that really affects the sound, especially with lower frequencies. Because with lower frequency instruments like kick drums and basses and all that, those waveforms are huge. I mean, look at this. A 50 hertz waveform is over 22 feet long, and that's where you get a lot of boom from a kick drum. And an 808 or a deep bass might go even lower than that. So you're talking like 20 to 30 feet for some of these waveforms that is moving through your room and interacting with other low frequencies, which will literally, if they're not lined up the right way, will cancel out sound. Now, I'm not a scientist. Let me just show you what I'm talking about here. Oh, and one disclaimer before I catch any hell from the much smarter and more eloquent people out there. I do understand that sometimes we interchange the word phase and polarity when discussing this stuff. Polarity is when you just flip the phase or flip the positive and negative of a signal. If you look on a plugin or a piece of hardware like a mic pre or EQ, you'll see that there's a polarity button, but I've always referred to it as the phase button. I'm going to put a link in the comments section that goes a little more depth into that if you want to dive more into this subject. It's actually really important. But anyway, back to what I was going to show you before. So right here, I've got a 62 hertz sine wave, which is fundamentally almost a B. It's actually a little different, but that's the closest I could get with this thing. And I chose that because that's what key of the song is in. But as you can see right here, we've got these waveforms lined up. I got this frequency on 2 tracks, the same frequency at equal volumes, and it sounds really full. But if I flip the phase, you see how it goes opposite now. See how the waveforms are not lined up. You got on one track, you've got the waveform going up, whereas on the other track, the waveform is going down and vice versa. Makes the sound disappear. And it's crazy because look, like there's still sound happening right there, but it appears to be invisible. Kind of crazy. And this is an extreme example of this. Now, let's just say it's not perfectly out of phase. Let's say it's just moved a little bit. As you'll notice, as I move the lower track over a little bit, the second sine wave, the sound keeps getting quieter and quieter because it's slowly getting out of phase. And it's going to make the sound disappear. Now, of course, you know, in music and mixing, you rarely have two sounds that line up exactly like this, but the same principle applies. If you've got two kick drums or a kick and a bass and they're not really lined up exactly, and they're different, even if they're different instruments and the fundamental tones are different, if they're not lined up the right way, they will subtract frequencies from each other and thus be slightly out of phase. So you'll get certain parts of the low-end signal kind of erased or subtracted from the mix. And I think what's going on in this song here is that I'm thinking maybe he programmed the kick drum in and played the bass part or vice versa. So maybe when he's coming out of that second part, he was always a little late or a little early on that first note. So thus it's not lining up. And when they hit together, you're losing some low end. So let's go back to that now, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. I just go in here and I just listen till I hear something and I move it. Like when it sounds weak, I go in, I look at the waveform, and I just try to line it up with the kick drum. Then I listen on. Yep, here's another one. Not quite as much out of phase in the other one. Continue listening. There's another one. Ah, that's really out of phase. Move it to where it needs to go. And don't give me a bunch of hell about how I'm doing on fades here, guys. It's fine. I mean, I know some people get overboard on that stuff. So I know some of you are probably wondering, like, well, why didn't you just get one section and copy and paste it all the way down? Well, here's the deal. Look at this. It's not consistent. It's not a repeating thing. There's some sections where it was out of phase more than others. And the other thing is I can't always assume what the client has done. Maybe they've tweaked out some stuff. I'm not going to make an assumption necessarily that they cut and paste everything all the way down. There might be some subtle differences, and I want to honor that as much as possible. So I put the extra effort into going down and getting this, you know, linearly, shall I say. And it's a little extra work, but that's what you got to do if you really want to make it sound the way you want it to sound. It's what you got to do if you want to compete with the big boys. That's what it looks like. Now, of course, that's not the only thing I'm doing to level out the low end. As you can see here, I'm using this Pro Q3 equalizer to kind of balance out some of the frequencies a little bit, but that's probably a subject for another video. Some of you are probably thinking, why move all these notes? Like maybe that's what was intended, you know, kind of like with a band. Sometimes it's kind of cool to have the bassist and the drummer not exactly together, or maybe the bass is dragging a little bit, but that's not what kind of music this is. This is club music, man. This is something that you want to just have hitting really hard. You want to have people in their cars blasting this thing, and you want every note, every low-end note to have the same amount of low end. You want people like be bouncing their head. You want people to be just jamming on this stuff. You want to make people want to bounce. You want to make people want to jump.
I'm in the birthday mood. If you rockin' getting figures, it's your birthday too. Shorty rockin' getting figures, it's your birthday too. With your fine self, yeah, put on your birthday suit. Yeah, I'm in the birthday mood. If you rockin' getting figures, it's your birthday too. Shorty rockin' getting figures, it's your birthday too. With your fine self, yeah, put on your birthday suit.
Thanks for watching, and please remember to hit the subscribe button.
Like a pen to a pad, rain make it rain, I make it flood. Pumping that big bass, so you know she show love.